Welcome to Slow News Day. I'm Steve Poikinen. We highlight artists, activists, organizers, and agitators who are pushing back against the establishment here in late stage capitalism in the heart of the empire. Some of you guys may have noticed that Sarah isn't sitting next to me right now. She took a break from the show and is gone indefinitely. We miss her very much. She's getting overwhelmed with life and work and everything else that fucking is the entire reason that we have a show anyway, because it's fucking late stage capitalism and here we are. It's hard to keep this shit going. It's hard to fucking work multiple jobs and find a reason to fucking distract yourself. Having said that, dude, fucking all the love in the world to Sarah. I'd love to see you this weekend at the Eyes Open Network meetup. We're going up to right around Mount Shasta for a few days. It'll be a fucking big old tinfoil hat flat earth convention, motherfuckers. I'm just kidding. It'll be great. Joining me today is a friend of mine that I originally met through the Progressive Independent Party's involvement in Tim Canova's campaign. I was in the room when I interviewed Tim for PIP back in the day, I think, right? So man, let's get to it. I've got a hell of a guest right here. His name's Al Suarez, and Al lives down in Miami. I'm fucking my intro up all over the place because my fucking notes are gone. He's a writer, he is an activist, he's a blogger, he's an FAU student, and he's the founder of the Revolutionary Alliance. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Al Suarez. How are you, man?
Thank you for having me. Quick correction. I'm no longer in Miami. I'm in Boca Raton.
Oh, you're in Boca.
An hour north of Miami.
Okay.
Where FAU, Florida Atlantic University, is located. I'm a transfer student here.
Okay.
But I like what you were saying about late stages of capitalism. I mean, the U.S. empire is in decay right now. And the real heart of the empire is in Miami, because where do you think they train all these gusanos, these right-wing extremist Cuban and Venezuelan groups? They bring them to Miami. They finance them and they give them the weapons, and then they send them back to do sabotage in Latin America.
Marco Rubio pretty much said that out loud in a couple of tweets and in an interview. I mean,
literally, it was physically impossible that he wasn't behind the electricity sabotage in Venezuela. Physically impossible, because within 1 minute before the Venezuelan media even reported on it, he was twittering, "Oh, look, the electricity's out in Venezuela."
Yep.
And then like a half an hour before it happened, he was saying, "We need to do something to foment the crisis in Venezuela." Yep. So I don't think it's ever been so overt. The United States usually likes to hide their coups. Now they're saying, "Oh yeah, we'll bring out the Maduro doctrine. Oh yeah, we'll sabotage the economy. And oh yeah, this fake leader Guaido, he's going to go to different Latin American countries with the CIA groomers and say, I authorize an invasion of the United States into my country." I mean, what nonsense is this? I've never seen it so obvious, and yet people are still deceived because you have this mass ignorance in the mass media. People that couldn't find Venezuela on a map a week ago, now all of a sudden they're experts on Venezuelan democracy.
So Chris Hedges makes the point that we're so divided, we're so intentionally divided, that now they can steal from us in broad daylight and with zero consequences and zero repercussions because of how we've been programmed, essentially. And you're right. Any clear-thinking person looks at Marco Rubio ahead of the curve on the Venezuelan blackout, which is just like the Guatemalan blackout, which is just like the Chilean plague. When John Kiriakou was on the show, I was like, why the fuck do you not change the playbook? How come the CIA never changes the playbook? And he was like, well, they're not that bright and they get away with it. Straight up.
Honest.
You know? Or they're not that creative. It's not that they're not that bright. They're devious as fuck, but they're not that creative. And every time they've done this, they've faced no repercussions. When it finally comes out that Marco Rubio and Mike Pence and Elliot Abrams were the ones that were behind this whole coup, nobody's going to give a fuck because we'll have lionized Mike Pence by that point.
Is a convicted war criminal.
Yeah.
Okay, this is
I
not
know.
I mean, if it wasn't for Reagan pardoning him in the '80s for backing death squads in Central America,
George Bush
he would
pardoned
be
him, but yeah.
alive.
Yeah.
So he's a convicted in an American court, not an international court, because they never convict Americans, but in an American court, he was found guilty of being a war criminal. And guess what he did in El Salvador? He brought in humanitarian aid and filled it up with Kalashnikovs, bazookas, all types of weapons. Of course, if I was Maduro, I wouldn't want the Elliot Abrams humanitarian aid bus sent in from Colombia. It was probably full of weapons. And now the New York Times is finally saying the truth, what we've been saying all along. There was footage on the border in Cucuta that showed that the Venezuelan opposition themselves set fire to that bus. So, they always do these false flags, and, they blame it on Maduro, and the evidence comes out. We knew right away. We reported it in the alternative media right away. It took about 3 weeks, but finally now even the New York Times is saying the truth. And, of course, they were labeling us conspiracy theorists, but we were just reporting the facts.
It's fascinating to me how like Max Blumenthal can go down. I don't know if you saw this clip or not, but he put he put up a clip.
Supermarket. This is the social state that's depriving people of all the food, and there's like an abundance of food in the aisles. And there is. The problem is the prices, because the opposition controls the prices in the U.S. and they inflate the prices to sabotage their own country. But these people in the United States, if they did this, they would be called traitors in Santa Guantanamo.
Yeah.
But these people are trying to pass off as patriots when they're trying to invade their own country, sell out their own oil, and these people will sell out their own mother. I mean, the Spanish term for them is vendepatrias, which the literal meaning is one who sells out their country.
Okay.
And that's what they're doing. And these are far-right, fascist, racist groups that come to Miami that we've been confronting, that we've been protesting against. And it's on every citizen journalist to expose these people. And that's what the Revolutionary Alliance is about, as you mentioned. It emerged from, last year from people that were part of MPP and other progressive groups and wanted to form something new and really wanted to get behind the idea of a new political party. We see what's going on today. MPP, all they do now is post, support Bernie this, support Bernie that. It's like, wait a minute, weren't you about forming a political party? And we saw this coming because you have the phonies and then you have the real revolutionaries,
So for the people who are listening who don't know or may not know, MPP is the Movement for People's Party, and it was well, Al, I mean, you can tell a little bit better than I can because you were involved.
They're trying to pass me off as just another volunteer. That's not true. I was working behind the scenes in very important negotiations. It was me and one other person in charge of negotiating with the Spaniards to come to train MPP. The Spaniards very successfully out of the Indignados movement, which was a movement very similar to Occupy, formed a political party called Podemos. I lived in Spain. I had direct contact with Podemos. And Nick confided in me, the founder of MPP, in initiating the negotiations and being a translator. And not only that, I was a regional campus lead. There's very few regional campus leads in South Florida. And I was a regional campus lead in charge of recruiting all the students to MPP. And, so I knew the ins and outs of MPP. I wasn't just some volunteer like they're trying to say about me. And, I wasn't the only one. There was a lot of people that were disappointed with what was going on. They didn't really see the steps taken to form a new political party. They just saw it as a way to get Bernie to run. It was originally called Draft Bernie.
Yeah.
And even though there was a name change, that's continued to be the focus. Like, guys, when are we going to start forming a political party? When are we going to bring the Spaniards on? It just kept getting postponed. And, finally, a lot of us said we need to start a Revolutionary Alliance. And, we formed up with Progressive Independent Party and others. And that's how you build. That's how you make coalition. If you're serious about building a political party, no matter how much you like Bernie, you have to be serious and you have to pressure those candidates or get your own candidates to run it in a third party and try to change the system.
I agree with that 100%. I've asked this question to a lot of people, including Tim and Canova, and including Lee Camp and fucking Graham Elwood. And like, do you honestly think that voting in a rigged system inside a duopoly is a realistic avenue for change? And they're like, well, fuck, no.
We need to make radical change and transformative change and replace the system with a new one. And one of the first things you have to do is what Virginia did. They did it practically overnight. Virginia's a state about the size of Florida. And in Virginia, they went paper ballot 100%. And so it doesn't matter if you have electronic ballot accompanying paper ballot like you have here in Florida, because they can still make the ballots disappear like they did with Canova twice, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, that was part of his campaign as well. So, what you need is paper ballot, but also do what they do in Venezuela. Venezuela has one of the most democratic systems in the world. Even Jimmy Carter had said this. They have a receipt printed out. They have an automatic audit based on their negotiations with the opposition, and so you have a receipt printed out that shows how you voted. Now, if you could buy a piece of candy in the United States for 50 cents and demand a receipt, and you have to give a receipt, what's more important, a piece of candy or your vote? I mean, this is just common sense, but they don't implement these things, and they go Russia this, Russia that. It's like, okay, if you really think that we're being, taken over by the Russians in our electoral system, why don't we go paper ballot? Then they're silent. Then you don't hear a word.
And
because
it turns out
domestic actors that are doing this,
It turns out that the real collusion, was the friends we made along the way. That's how that played out. When there were just a handful of us 2.5 years ago saying Russiagate is bullshit, this is fucking madness, this was, Robbie Mook and John Podesta fucking hunkered down in Hillary Clinton's campaign office on election night going, how can we unfuck this? How can we get out of avoiding any responsibility for rigging a primary to lose to a fucking game show host? How can we do that?
Do you know why they're not talking about the contents of the Mueller investigation? And I'm no Trump supporter, but the reason why they're not talking about the actual contents of it is because there's zero proof of Russian collusion. He had all this time, all this money to investigate, and he got nothing. This just came out.
We've been saying that for fucking years, though, man. I mean, Bill Binney came on Jimmy Dore's show in fucking January of 2017 going, hi, I'm the OG NSA codebreaker. That's me. I wrote the original program. I didn't, and they went with the other program that spied on everybody. But if you look at all of this, if you look at all of this information, if you look at the rate at which it was downloaded, and fucking then people like Elizabeth Voss went and spent a couple of more years reporting on it, there's no way that Russia hacked the DNC emails. There's no way that Russia...
The United States accused Russia of trying to influence the elections. Every major country tries to influence elections of their rivals.
Do you remember when Donna Brazile kept saying Russian WikiLeaks? Do you remember when that was a fucking talking point for 2 seconds?
She said, you know what, maybe it was rigged against Bernie. It's like, yeah, because the emails show you were part of that. So they're saying that she's some hero because she's exposing the rigging. It's like, you were part of that. You're saying that so you can sell more books.
It's why you got fired, And then she had the fucking gall to say Seth Rich's name out loud on fucking an interview with Tim Black and never said it again after that. She said that...
Schultz had to step down. Donna Brazile had to step down. All these people, Tulsi Gabbard did the right thing and stepped down because she saw the corruption going on as vice chair. But, it's ridiculous. But I wanted to point out a couple of contradictions real quick that I just wrote down so I wouldn't forget. First off, how are you going to say that Trump is an agent for Putin when he's attacking Maduro, who's backed by Putin?
Yeah.
That's one contradiction I point out in the debate. Another important contradiction, we're talking about Venezuela, is the National Assembly, right? So everybody knows that this 35-year-old guy came out of nowhere, Juan Guaido, and he's now head of the National Assembly. The National Assembly is controlled by the opposition, right? So when we're in a protest and the fascists come and yell at us, usually in Spanish, usually the people are just arrived from Venezuela, but they're, backed by the CIA. So they can do whatever they want. But They come, they attack, they yell at us in the protest, and we usually outnumber them. So they're under control, and there's some cops there, kind of a buffer. But this is what I yell back at them. I say, who controls the National Assembly? How did the National Assembly get elected? They can't say anything because Venezuelan democracy had it where the opposition won a sector of the government. And all they've been doing ever since is trying to sabotage Maduro and their own country, selling out their own country. And so Maduro's calling for elections. He says, I want elections of the National Assembly because the Venezuelan people hate the National Assembly now more than ever. They regret voting that way. And, even more moderate opposition are coming out and saying, yes, we need to have new elections in the National Assembly because they've been corrupted by extremists like Juan Guaido, who wants a foreign invasion. So, these moderate members of the opposition that reach deals with Maduro, they're calling for elections too. But Guaido's people, of course, are doing everything possible to prevent that because they know they're going to lose. So this is the equivalent of, Nancy Pelosi stepping down. They have some new guy out of nowhere become head of our Congress, and then he announces himself president. And then Putin goes to the Canadian border and sends a truck full of guns to back this guy up. I mean,
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And again, this goes back to the CIA runs from the same playbook because they get away with it. It's not. Juan Guaido went to fucking George Washington University.
He was educated here, yeah.
I mean, that's literally 20 miles from fucking Langley. Like, I'm not even, I mean, that's no hyperbole whatsoever. It's literally right up the road from fucking Langley. When we had Cynthia McKinney on, she was like, yeah, fucking universities are of course a recruitment center for the CIA. It's what they've been doing since they got
quite
there.
Open. There's a part of this campus called Breezeway, where they have tables for recruiting students to different companies, and sometimes there's a table that says CIA on it.
Yeah.
And what was fascinating is what was his name? The great historian Howard Zinn. When I read A People's History of the United States, which is is a very long book, but one of the things I remember about that book is when he talked about, I think it was at his college in Boston University, they successfully petitioned that the CIA recruiters be thrown off campus. So that was an example of student activism successfully getting the CIA recruiters out. But they even infiltrated the Peace Corps. I've heard recordings of John Kennedy complaining. He's saying, these motherfuckers at the CIA, I tried to start the Peace Corps so kids could know Latin America and other countries, and the CIA started to infiltrate it. He was pissed about it.
Yeah.
He was ready to send the CIA to the four corners of the world. He was going to get rid of them. You know about Dulles and these guys. I mean,
of course,
it's not even a theory at this point.
No,
but I wanted to mention something about Hedges. You do not know how close I was to meeting Chris Hedges at Occupy. This is like a joke, but it really happened. No hyperbole here. This is what happened. So literally, there's a guy. He's as close to, like, as if his shoulder was bumping up against mine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking to another guy, and he was talking to a third person, and the third person who was right here, the head was, the back of the head was like that, so I can see who it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Oh yeah, how you been? Okay, I'm gonna go over to the other part of the camp. All right." This was during Occupy up in Boston. And then I met him later in my tent. He says, I was just with Chris Hedges. Chris Hedges, where? I love Chris Hedges. He says, that was the guy that was right next to you. Where is he? He left. That's how close I was to meeting him. This was back in 2011, but I always loved Chris Hedges. He's a great journalist, and I'm sure he's read up on Orwell. And before the recording of the show, we were talking about one of my favorite Orwell quotes, which is also one of Canova's favorite Orwell quotes, where he said, in a world of universal deceit, speaking the truth is a revolutionary act. So, some people say, don't say that we're revolutionary. No, I'll embrace it. We're a revolutionary alliance. Many figures in history like Che and others were great revolutionaries. And, there's different methods that you can use depending on the times. But look, I mean, if they consider you that way just for speaking the truth, with all the deception that's out there, I say embrace it.
One of my favorite Orwell quotes is journalism is printing what people don't want printed. Everything else is public relations.
Public relations. That's one of my favorites.
And that's where we're at. That's where we've been at with Russiagate. That's where we've been at. So I have two correlating timelines, and one starts with the assassination of JFK.
That's when we went a downward spiral, towards a more fascist state. They tried to do it with FDR too.
Well,
our nation's history doesn't even teach us.
It's intelligence agency, specifically CIA, control of all branches of government and the media. And you see this
the OSS. I met Bobby Kennedy Jr. here on this campus last year, and he was talking about it in his speech. So the OSS were, the intelligence agency before the CIA.
Yeah.
And Joe Kennedy, his grandfather, John Kennedy's father, was trying to use his influence to end the OSS. And eventually they were ended. But then in 1948, the CIA got propped up. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's a connection. There's not only a connection between the banks and Wall Street and Prescott Bush, George Bush II's grandfather, to attempt against FDR. But there's also probably a connection with the OSS. So they would have killed FDR. They would have made it a military dictatorship and made sure the United States allied with the Nazis. But what happened? The guy who wrote one of the most famous anti-war books, General Butler, most decorated war hero.
That's Smedley Butler if you're playing along at home.
Butler, but I'm trying to remember the name of the book. War is a Racket.
War is a Racket was the book.
What a title. Yeah, so what people don't know about him, he's famous for that book, but what they don't know is that they were going to make him like the co-dictator.
Yeah, they tried to get Smedley Butler
and expose them, and FDR didn't do anything about it. Well, he did. He said, okay, if you don't want me to put you in jail for trying to assassinate me, what I'm going to do is let me pass my New Deal. The New Deal policies that you've been resisting, let me do it. They backed off because they knew they could get in big trouble. That's politics for you, right?
And then Butler turned around and ran for president against Roosevelt as a communist.
You're talking about Wallace?
No, Butler.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Ran for president again in the next election, but as a communist.
Interesting.
Butler's one of the more fascinating figures, man. I was in a Safeway a couple of months ago, and I saw a random dude wearing a Smedley Butler T-shirt with the fucking "War is a Racket" quote on it. I was like, "Fuck yeah, dude!" Like, it's not just me. Right now, this Keep Punching Up. That's a Jimmy Dore Show shirt. You know.
Have you heard of Immortal Technique?
Oh, I fucking love Immortal Technique.
I can show you my picture with him. I had a long conversation with him in Spanish in Philly a couple of years ago. And the other day I was at the cafeteria here on campus, and I was talking to my friend about Immortal Technique, who's loved Immortal Technique, since he was a kid. And then somebody got in the conversation, because you'd be surprised, a lot of people heard of Immortal Technique, even though he's not mainstream. But that's another example of somebody who's not afraid to say revolution.
Well, they've heard his name because Kweli put him on early.
He was a great activist rapper in revolution.
I saw him and Last Emperor. In the middle of fucking. I mean, it was in Brooklyn, but this was like, 99.
So you saw them perform?
Yeah. Yeah. Have you seen Last Emperor? Are you familiar with Last Emperor?
I'm gonna look it up when we're done, because I like Immortal's music,
bro. Okay, so when you introduced yourself to Last Emperor, go ahead and check the track that he did off Lyricist Lounge with KRS and Zach De La Roca. It's called CIA.
Oh, yeah, of course I know about KRS and De La Roca.
Okay, so the track is called CIA. The track is called CIA Criminals in Action. They got some shit wrong, but they got a lot of shit right too. And Last Emperor's verse on that cut, and no disrespect to KRS-One or Zach De La Roca, fucking love them both, but Last Emperor's verse on that cut is the fucking dopest one on it. That dude's rad. We got there from Immortal Technique. That's fucking
what? Music is a good way to get young people involved in politics. And talking about, U.S. coups, Chile, Guatemala, goes all the way back to the 50s at least. One of my favorite quotes from Salvador Allende, who suffered a coup in Chile. He was a progressive. He said, to be young and not be revolutionary is a contradiction. He actually said it's a biological contradiction. So a good way to get people into the revolutionary causes through music, through rap, the young people like to listen to. Because, you have the bling bling now. I like more of the old school, like Tupac and Biggie. And Tupac was very political, as you know. His family were Black Panthers.
Yeah.
But, now it's all capitalism and bling bling and look at my Mercedes. I don't get it. I don't listen to those.
Well, that's intentional, man. That's intentional, though. I mean, even if you go on the way down, because I fucking am wired the way I'm wired or whatever. I was listening to Detrás on the way over. Down in the studio, and fucking, I mean, this is like 94 that they're talking about this shit. Like, look, man, the rap game.
The WTO was formed at that time.
Yeah,
it used to be that.
Yeah, but like, the Detrás is straight up saying, look, man, this is what the rap game does. The rap game inflates these fucking fake ass motherfuckers who present you a lifestyle, and by presenting you the lifestyle and putting that lifestyle in association with not just the music but the way that you're supposed to behave and act, it's creating a culture that will allow this new 1994 Crime Prevention Act to round up as many of you motherfuckers as possible. Like, it's
not only did that, not only did they do mandatory sentence and make a whole generation of blacks go to jail, the Clintons also shipped all the U.S. jobs overseas with NAFTA.
Yeah.
Shut down major factories in the Midwest. So when Trump talked about that, he was absolutely right. And so there was a lot of people within the working class, and I've heard figures that said that most Trump supporters voted for Obama twice. But a lot of these people that voted for Trump, and I voted third party, I'm a Jill Stein guy. But, they didn't do so out of racism or, because of those racial things that he was talking about. They did it because they were fed up with the Democrats, and they saw Hillary as the worst. It's like, this, what's the term? She's kind of like, what's it called? Like when somebody's like they got acid thrown on their face, disfigured.
Oh,
so
yeah.
She's like the disfiguration of the Democratic Party, the worst face you could possibly put. So of course they were going to end up voting for Trump. And yeah, technically he won the popular vote, but that's because of California. If you look at all the other 49 states, you get areas where they never voted Republican. Pennsylvania, all the working class in Pennsylvania came out for Trump.
Because it was the fucking Clintons' campaign strategy to hand it to him. Clintons came out and said on TV, and Chuck Schumer came out and said on TV, fucking infamously now, for every blue-collar worker we lose in rural Pennsylvania, we can pick up a suburban conservative, and we can repeat this process in Philadelphia, and we can repeat this process in Ohio and Wisconsin and all the other fucking states they lost to, because they're playing. Like, again, this goes back to Hedges. They're stealing from us in broad fucking daylight. The Democratic Party's strategy was to abandon the working class out loud. If that's not telegraphing intent as to what the party fucking means in general, I don't know what is. They're explaining to you.
I got 3 words for you. Basket of deplorables. That's what did it. That's what did it. When she said that, there was no way that the working class were ever going to consider voting Democrat again.
One time in January in 2016, Lawrence O'Donnell was allowed to say on MSNBC, every time Hillary Clinton talks, her poll numbers go down, which was a factual statement. It's historically true. And he was allowed to say it once, and nobody on MSNBC was allowed to say it ever again.
Look what they did to Phil Donahue. He was the most popular host on MSNBC in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
So they were making a lot of money off this guy.
Yeah.
But they went against their own capitalist interest to defend the war.
Yes.
Because all he was doing was trying to make a debate and showing both sides about the Iraq war. And just because of that, because he wasn't, saying, let's go to war, they threw him off the air. And he wasn't the only one. So this is the so-called democratic system that we have. Who are we as Americans to try to say, no, Venezuela has to be our way? They can't have referendums where they can re-elect Maduro a bunch of times. What about FDR? So you're going to tell me FDR wasn't a dictator? He was re-elected 3 times. He died in office. Back then, you could re-elect people all the time you want. Why do they have to have our style of government? If the people in a referendum decide that, who are we to impose our will on them and back, bozos like this Juan Guaido?
So I'm not sure. Guaido does not count as bozo. He's a fucking puppet. We know that. He's an asset. He's an agent. He's in the employ of our vice president, a U.S. senator, and our intelligence community. He's a lackey and a lapdog and replaceable 100%. Juan Guaido should be fearful every day that he does not step out of line, or else he will be in the exact same position as Maduro is, or worse, as Gaddafi was. Like Rubio tweeted out, you think that threat was just a Maduro and not Guaido too?
People cannot say that Rubio didn't know that Gaddafi was tortured. That he could defend himself by saying, oh, no, I thought he died in an airstrike. I didn't mean that Maduro should be tortured. Guess what? He showed a picture of Gaddafi physically being tortured and bloody and beaten, and used that picture to say that should be done to Maduro.
Yeah.
If we were a functioning democracy, Rubio would have had to step down after that tweet.
So no, and again, I mean, my point still stands is that tweet was sent. It was meant to Guaido just as much as it was Maduro, because Guaido is a fucking puppet, you know?
Look at Noriega, look at Saddam. They were the best friends of the United States. And Gaddafi started reconciling with the West too, and started rounding up Al Qaeda and cooperating with with the United States. And then look what happened to him.
Noriega was a fucking CIA agent.
Noriega, like Saddam, like Gaddafi, what happens? You end up getting taken out of power anyways. So it might be better just to stay away from the United States. You know what's funny? And again, I'm not anti-American. I'm saying this, as a criticism of the government and the imperialist system. But for example, the reason why the Japanese in the world economic crisis that happened in 2008 were one of the few countries that weren't affected. Do you know why?
They create their own currency. They're the sole issuer of it.
It's not just that. It was the language barrier. Because when they sent the Americans to tell them what to do, like they were telling the rest of the world what to do in Europe and all those countries, the Japanese didn't understand. There was a language barrier. There was a lack of translation. And so the Japanese ignored the U.S. advice, and they were one of the only ones that weren't affected by the crisis. So, if you want to not get damaged, the best thing you do is to try to stay out of the U.S. sphere of influence. It's in decay. The U.S. is an empire in decay. And, the rivals in Russia and China are starting to rise up. China's doing business with Venezuela. U.S. is trying to sabotage it. This could be part of the reason why that they're exacerbating this crisis in Venezuela.
Well, China's pushing their own one world currency as well. And China has been slowly accomplishing in Africa what we tried to do through colonialization and fucking covert war. And China's doing it differently. They're just outright bribing people and governments for their natural resources instead of creating a conflict arming both sides.
I'm against all empires. So,
I'm not saying. I mean, that wasn't an attack on you. I'm glad you brought China into the discussion because there's.
What I support is democracy, right? So 90% of Russians support Putin. That's a fact that nobody disputes. They even report on that in the mainstream press here. And part of the reason is the sanctions. U.S. sanctions make the leader always more popular, just like it was in Cuba. Fidel was extremely popular as a result of U.S. sanctions in the blockade there. And the U.S. never learns, as you said earlier, what the CIA was doing. Einstein said, making the same mistake again and again and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. And these same policies, continue.
Well, it's, I mean, yeah, because there's no fucking consequences. It's, we live in a propagandized state where 95% of our media, or 90% of our media, is owned by 6 companies. Disney just bought most of Fox. They left Fox News and Fox Sports out of it, so Fox News is still.
I know they owned ABC for a while. They probably still do.
Yeah, and a lot of other affiliate networks. I think Disney now owns more media than the rest of the media companies.
Can you imagine ABC or Fox reporters going into the ghettos to see how people live? Of course, they want the economy to look thriving. Otherwise, you're not going to want to go down to Orlando, to Disney World or Disneyland. Well, let me bring something else up real quick. So we like to talk about international stuff, right? We're going to do multi-topics here. So all you got to do is use the most dramatic example of a referendum where overwhelming majority of people in that region voted a certain way is Crimea, right? We're talking about Putin. And again, I'm not coming in as a Putin supporter. I'm coming in as a pro-democracy person. So Crimea has always been Russian, historically. Mm-hmm. In an internationally supervised referendum, much like the referendum to go down to Venezuela, I think it was 98.7, 98.8% of the Crimeans voted to rejoin Russia.
Yeah.
And so I say rejoin because, again, they were part of Russia. So then they say annexation, invasion, sanctions, just because Putin accepted the decision. But that's the problem. You have this mass ignorance, and it's willingly ignorant, too, because we're in the information age here, where people could never find Crimea on the map. All of a sudden now they're experts of Ukrainian democracy.
I had this exact conversation with Jeremy Pridgeon, a dude I grew up with that I am now friends on Facebook with, and even though we live like an hour and a half away from each other, we haven't connected, but I've known this dude for like 30 years, and fucking he didn't know that Crimea voted to annex itself. I told him that.
Yeah.
And he was like, what? No, that's not how that works. And I'm like, yeah, dude. And I sent article after article, and I'm like, look, I'm not cherry picking news sources. I'm going from the most mainstream news sources that I can possibly find, because I know you're not going to believe if I show you a Jimmy Dore link, or if I show you Disobedient Media, or if I showed you any of the outlets that I had written for, because you're so programmed to only responding to MSNBC or that the Huffington Post is as far outside of the what you think corporate media is that you'll accept. And he's not alone in that. But once
can I ask you something real quick?
Yeah.
Is this live?
No.
Okay, so we're gonna get it recorded and then put it out. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, the Huffington Post is liberal, and I don't mean that in the progressive sense of the word. I'll give you an example. Jesse Ventura, right? One of my heroes. I hope he runs for president. Jesse Ventura, he was offered a position at Huffington Post, and they said you can write anything you want, and they were really looking forward to it. And so the first article that he wrote was about 9/11, and they said, Mr. Ventura, we're sorry, we're going to have to cancel the contract.
Yeah.
And you know why? Because they don't want to get into the controversial conspiratorial stuff. But it's like, yeah, so liberals will say you can say whatever you want, and until you said something that's outside their boundary. Chomsky talks about that. So.
Absolutely. So, and one real quick thing about that, about Jesse Ventura trying to write an article just about 9/11 specifically, is that if you talk to conservatives or Democrats and you ask them, can you believe anything that came out of the George W. Bush White House? They're like, oh, that lying ass motherfucker. What about 9/11? And they're like, oh, well, surely the one time the George W. Bush White House told the God's honest truth was specifically about this one catastrophic event. But every other time he lied, but this one thing. And I'm like, come on, man. You can't. That's it. Questioning the narrative is what we're supposed to do. As activists, as independent media, as journalists, as citizens, as people. Questioning the narrative is what's supposed to keep these motherfuckers scared enough to tell the truth some of the time, as opposed to what they are, which is comfortable and gaining wealth and consequence-free from their fucking lies and their fucking wars and their fucking grift. And I think it's hilarious that I get called a conspiracy theorist, but Rachel Maddow got to make $30,000 a day by pushing the biggest fucking conspiracy that we've had since WMD about fucking Russiagate. She profits.
My favorite quote of all times from Glenn Greenwald, another hero of mine, great journalist. He worked with Snowden and all that.
Yeah.
Started the Intercept. Glenn Greenwald said that he was personal friends. Like, she came down to Brazil, I guess, because he stays out of the United States, but that they were friends, him and Rachel Maddow, for a long time, and that she was a progressive, independent thinker. And he said it's sad to see how she's sold out, and she has gone against everything that she used to be. But she saw her colleagues being fired for speaking out, and rather than do what Tulsi did and quit with dignity, she said, "Well, I'm going to have to be a sellout too," and that's what she's done. And all those people that she used to call conspiracy theorists, now she's the real conspiracy theorist, right?
Oh,
because
my
she's
God.
pushing this Russiagate crap.
Putin's gonna hack the electric grid and freeze your nana.
They make paper ballot. That's the thing. If what they say they really believe, then offer a solution.
Yeah.
All they're doing is trying to form this hysteria. It's like McCarthyism,
Well, it is, and it's fucking, and it leads to direct red baiting, man. People are like actual fucking 1950s red baiting, where people are like,
Putin is a communist, blah, blah, blah. He's a capitalist, okay? So he's actually a social conservative, but
So there was a pro-capitalist faction of the KGB that was working with the United States intelligence services as early on as the mid-70s to try and fucking oust. Pardon?
Didn't know about this. Do some research.
Oh, yeah, by all means. Vladimir Putin was in that faction of the KGB.
I knew he was in East Germany. He speaks German fluently.
When we had that famous Time magazine cover with Boris Yeltsin on the cover, holding up.
Well, Yeltsin, you can't compare Yeltsin to Putin, right?
We're not at all. But follow where I'm going with this, man.
Yeah.
The Time magazine cover, it had Boris Yeltsin holding up an American flag and a Russian flag, and it said "Yanks to the rescue." How United States intelligence services, basically, I don't know the exact quote, but it says how the U.S. intelligence service colluded with
Free Europe. Who funded Radio Free Europe in Hungary and Poland?
So
the CIA.
My point to all this is that we bragged about the U.S. intelligence services influencing the Russian election to get Boris Yeltsin elected the first democratic leader of Russia, of the Russian Federation. His number one guy was Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin has been president or prime minister ever since there's been a free Russia, and it would not surprise me in the least if Putin is this generation's Manuel Noriega, where he's a CIA asset who got out of hand and had to be ousted, because that's exactly what happened.
Even Fidel, when he traveled to the United States in the 1950s to get support for the Cuban Revolution, who at that time was a nationalist, he wasn't a socialist yet. They say even Fidel had got some help from the CIA. So not every single person in history that tried to play
Andy got to bang Justin Trudeau's mom.
Not necessarily a sellout. They're going to be doing it because they really want to make a revolution. They're just using the CIA and stepping out. There's certain people that have done that.
It's hilarious that you think you could just use the CIA though. That's fucking that's a new tool. I mean, it's hard.
Look at Gloria Steinem, right? Look at Gloria Steinem. The Graph interviewed me about this. I don't know if it ever came out, but Gloria Steinem admitted in an interview for working for the CIA, and she started as a college student because she needed the grant money to fund her organization. But I'm not saying the justification. That's a bad thing because the CIA were funding them and cooperating with them in order to be divisive, and they embedded this term identity politics. And we see the result of that today, right? It's like, well, you have to vote for Hillary because she's a woman. It's like, what? What does that have to do with anything? And they immediately say, oh, you didn't vote for Hillary, you're sexist. It's like, excuse me, I voted for Jill Stein. So, you know.
But that's because you must be a secret, Putin agent, because Jill Stein's a secret Putin agent.
She was sitting at the same table as him at an RT conference. So what? I said the same table as somebody, it makes me their accomplice.
So no, it's just anything and everything to fucking keep the duopoly going. You know this, man. It's why you founded an organization called Revolutionary Alliance. It's not because the fucking system is functioning wrong. It's because the system is functioning as designed.
It's supposed to be, yeah.
That's
why reform is not enough.
No, reform is not an option. You can't.
That's unreformable. That's rigged. You need to replace the system. You have to have transformative change.
And that's what drives me nuts. If we can circle back, that's what drives me nuts about the people who are going apeshit over Bernie Sanders right now. And people who know better. People who have seen.
I'm sorry, but if this is not the cult of personality, I don't know what is.
So,
it's like Bernie can do no wrong. It's like he's a god.
And
he does good, he does bad, like any human being. But you can't say that to these people. He's a god.
There are a handful of honest people on Twitter who will tell you, look, man, Bernie's going to be a huge rightward compromise for me, and I know that he'll probably get less done than necessary, but I'm gonna end up voting for him. And there are people who are critical.
Well, I can't. I'm an NPA, so.
Huh?
I'm an on-party affiliate, so I can't vote for him in the primary. So.
Right. But if you're thinking in 2019 that the election in 2020 is going to, through Washington D.C. and electoral politics, provide a substantive enough change to eliminate, I don't know, climate threat, or fucking bring the bees back, or bring the butterflies back, or fucking, I mean, whether or not you believe in climate change, or whether or not you believe in geoengineering, there's reports out that both are real and both exist, and that there's a program in place to geoengineer away the sun's rays to make it less harmful for us. Dim the sun. By fucking
that's a dangerous tool, right?
Oh, because it's harmless.
Bees rather than
bury them
and geoengineer them so that they can be tolerant of insecticides. They can mess with our food so that even our organic food becomes GMO, right? So we got to be careful with that. It should be more about protecting the bees instead of making geoengineered bees that will pollinize our food supply and make all our food supply genetically modified.
So,
but let me ask or do you want to ask me something real quick?
Oh, no. Go ahead, man.
So you know who that great actress Jennifer Lawrence is? She was in the Hunger Games, great revolutionary movie.
I know who she is. I'm not that familiar with her, though. But I know
you've heard of the
is.
Hunger Games, of course. The Hunger Games,
yeah.
There was like 3 or 4 of them, and it had the late Seymour Hoffman. He had to be digitized in the last one.
Yeah.
So anyways, the reason why I mentioned her is she recently came out with the video, and I agree with 90% of the video. Because she's talking about how our system is corrupt, how, whether or not 90% of the population supports something, there's still a 30% chance that Congress will pass it, even if it's 0%, because of course it comes down to lobbies. So the lobbies and how they bribe, let's call things what they are, they bribe the politicians. It will determine whether the legislation will be passed. So all that part of the video till almost the very end, I agree with everything Jennifer Lawrence said. And I was thrilled that she had these views because I've been familiar with her talent as an actress, and it was great. Then at the very end of the video, she said, well, we have a solution for that. We need to make reforms. And she said, do this, do that, the other thing. And I'm not saying don't try that. But at the same time, we need to have a more radical solution. We need to, replace the system. Some people might say overthrow, but, just replace the system altogether. Make some real changes, make some revolutionary courts here, because our judicial system is so corrupt, So I'm not saying don't try reform. But I'm saying have a revolutionary plan B ready. And that's what the Revolutionary Alliance is trying to do through our coalition building, is have that plan B ready to end this corrupt system that's leaving not only people of color, but the working class behind. It's an elitist system. It's undemocratic because capitalism, we have to face it. You can't fix it. And it's not compatible with democracy. Capitalism and the external arm of capitalism, imperialism, has prevented democracy throughout the world. And then when the people actually have a democratic government, like in Venezuela, they're defamed, they're sabotaged, and all these things happen. So, and what do they want? They want the natural resources of Venezuela, which has the #1 oil reserve in the world, more than even the Saudis. And yet they're still in crisis because the Saudis made a deal with the U.S. to sabotage the Russian and Venezuelan competitors and lower the price of oil. So Venezuela, it relies a lot on their oil resource. They're trying to diversify the economy, and this results in inflation. And the food companies owned by the opposition there keep the prices high. And these people sell out their own country. A lot of them don't have to live in Venezuela. They could go to Miami, and we confront them up here. We have protests, and there's a lot of people in the Latin community in Boca and Broward and in Miami that are progressive, that in the past have been afraid to speak out. And now they are. And actually, the majority of the Cuban community in Miami is against the embargo. Did you know that?
Because they're they're far enough removed from the original Exodus, right? To where they can look at it a little bit more critically.
Yeah, the younger generation, the old guard, loved the embargo. I don't know why. It only made sure Fidel could stay in power. But the new guard, they don't hate Cuba, and they see it as hurting themselves, their families. The embargo restricts how many times they can go visit their families. And that was something, I'm not an Obama fan, but that was something that was right that Obama did. And I was one of those Americans that flew down, with like a year of when Obama, or a couple years when Obama started to lift the embargo. And technically, the embargo is not in full-fledged anymore, even under Trump. People can still go down there. But it's just hypocrisy all around. And of course, the Canadians are also complicit in this. The Canadians and the Europeans. That surprised me. I thought Trudeau was going to step up.
Because he's Fidel's illegitimate kid?
His father stepped up to the United States and said, no, I'm going to go down and meet with Fidel. You would never see Trudeau go down and meet with Maduro. He's just being complicit in all of this. So that really made me disappointed with the Canadians, and I respect the Canadian system. I have family there. And the Europeans have pissed me off as well. But there are a lot of people, like in Spain, for example, like the Podemos party I mentioned earlier that I was speaking with when I was part of NPP and continue to have contact with, that are very supportive of the Venezuelan revolutionary government, or at the very least against Spain's position in demanding that there be new presidential elections. They just had presidential elections 3 months ago. Over 6 million Venezuelans voted for Maduro. You're going to have a genocide and kill those people off.
Yeah.
If you want to prevent the Chavista government down there.
Well,
and civil war, But there's Latin American countries stepping up. The small nation of Uruguay stepping up and saying, no, we need to be neutral. We need to have negotiations. Mexico with the new president Obrador stepping up. Nicaragua stepping up. And, of course, Cuba stepping up. The Cuban government is very close with the Venezuelan.
They're
standing up to the U.S. empire. Italy standing up and their independent prime minister. So not all the EU either. But there's a lot of pressure,
To that point, there was a clip of a State Department briefing where an Associated Press reporter asked or brought up the point when the propaganda was laid out that this is not a coup, Guaido is, the legitimate interim president, blah, blah, blah. The AP, and I don't know if you saw this or not, but the AP repeating, he's like, and over 50 nations agree. And the reporter's like, we need to put this in context. When you say that over 50 nations agree, there are 194 members in the United Nations. That's not even nearly half. Like, understand that, if you put that into perspective, that's the majority of the world recognizes that this is an illegal action taken place by
Turkey. Also recognizes the Venezuelan government.
So there's no other way to say it than the United States is the #1 state sponsor of terrorism globally. And what is happening in Venezuela is an act of terror. What is happening in Nicaragua, which nobody is fucking talking about, is an act of terror. And we're doing the exact same thing in Nicaragua right now that we just did in Venezuela. And I think
the Contras were a U.S. invention.
Just like ISIS, just like fucking Al-Qaeda.
Come and fight the Sandinistas, and they're trying to repeat that from the 80s, literally using the same actors, like Eli Amers, who was convicted back then of war crimes.
Yeah.
Now they're sending him, to Colombia. They might send him to Honduras, that has another client regime there to try to sabotage things in Nicaragua. So these people are coming out of the woodwork,
We live in a fucking cartoon, man. We live in a fucking cartoon. The last president got a Nobel Peace Prize and started 5 illegal wars and paved the way for an open-air slave market in Libya. This president's in the WWE Hall of Fame.
I'll be fair and say that Obama admitted that his worst mistake as president was invading Libya. But you know who masterminded that, right? Hillary.
Yeah.
Hillary went as Secretary of State to Rome and devised a plan to invade Libya. And when she found out that Gaddafi died, she joked about it.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a woman, Yeah. This is
maniacal chuckle even threw her head back. Their fucking beady little fucking lizard eyes gleamed in the.
And that's when the cameras weren't running, but the video's still there. So it was in between, like during commercials. Then you see how the real Hillary is. And she said, "We came, he saw, he died."
Yeah.
Quoting Caesar, and this is the Roman Empire. She literally went to Rome to devise this plan with the European powers who were complicit, who are now suffering the consequences.
And Donald Trump was educated at a Jesuit university.
It's going to happen. The borders are going to be open. There's going to be chaos. There's going to be slavery. There are all these refugees are getting up on Europe, and that's exactly what happened, which is a direct result of the U.S. and European policy, just like Central America.
I agree.
Sabotage Central America, and Zelaya in 2009, who was a real progressive leader in Honduras. And that's direct correlation with why these thousands of children come to the U.S. border. Something that the mainstream, or what I call the lamestream, never talks about. When I used to have a Blog Talk Radio show, every time I talk about the mainstream media, I call them the lamestream.
So did Sarah Palin.
They're lame. They're not functioning as the media should, which is supposed to be the watchdog of our government.
They are stenographers to power, and we need to. We need people to recognize that they're stenographers to power. We need people to recognize that these motherfuckers are state television. We need people to understand that when Anderson Cooper comes out to interview somebody, Anderson Cooper was a fucking CIA intern. We need people to understand that when the Fairness Doctrine was repealed, and that when the Telecom Act was passed, and that when the Patriot Act was signed, and then when the 2012 reauthorization of the NDAA was approved. With all of that is fucking correlated. It fucking destabilizes independent media. That's what it's designed to do. And the people that are on TV who are paid $30,000 a day to fucking gaslight you are fucking... They're actors, man.
Well, let me tell you something. When you're an anti-establishment figure, like Canova, you inspire others to do the same in different levels, right? So I was in student government here at FAU. You know, I majored in communications and minoring in poli-sci. And now I left student government because of the level of corruption. There are people literally working with Wasserman-Schultz. Remember, Broward is where Wasserman-Schultz is about 50 minutes from here.
Yeah.
So, you know, these Wasserman-Schultz people sabotaged us in student government and the changes we were trying to make. They knew we were Canova people. Now I'm trying to work with the college media where I see corruption as well. But anyway, something I mentioned earlier, Chomsky, right? I got to meet him and interview him once.
Awesome.
You know, Chomsky, you know, you're talking about sponsors of terror. Do you know that ever since World War II, 90% of deaths in all U.S. wars were civilian? 90%. That's not collateral damage. That's intentionally trying to put civilians to submit to your political will, which is the textbook definition of terrorism. So not only sponsors, but taking part in terrorism. And Chomsky said, if we wanted to apply the Nuremberg principles to U.S. presidents, every single one would have been executed since World War II.
Yep.
That says it all right there.
Yep, I agree. All right, man, I'm out of time here at the studio. Al, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate fucking...
Peace, brother. My pleasure, and we'll keep in touch.
Yes, absolutely, man. We'll talk soon. Thanks again so much, man. Man, that was wild. Shit.
People can go on Twitter and Facebook to find me, you know.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm on your Facebook soon.
Absolutely. And reach out to either me or Al if you want to become a part of his organization, the Revolutionary Alliance.
Yeah, we have a group on Facebook. Thank you, man.
All right, Al. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.